So good afternoon. I'm Patrick Mann, Director of SASAH. Western University is situated on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples who have long-standing relationships to the land and the region of southwestern Ontario and the City of London. The local First Nations communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. Western values the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island, North America. Good afternoon, all. Welcome. This is the first of our 3 talks in the 2019 Winter Speakers Series presentations, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to host Drs. Samantha Brennan and Tracy Isaacs, one a present and the other a former colleague here at Western, both philosophy professors who I admire very much as well. I admire the work that they're going to be talking about today, and as I will argue, I see them as connected, and I suspect they do too. Our theme for this year's series is Humanize the Future. Certainly Samantha and Tracy's work on their blog, Fit is a Feminist Issue, and their book on the same theme are well suited to our program in asking questions about the why, what, and how of feminist engagements with health and exercise and caring for the body. But I think what they're doing is more than just about keeping their own bodies going for the future and encouraging and educating others to do so. Samantha and Tracy are also demonstrating the commitment to connecting academic practice, the life of the mind, with the life of the body, and with the life of particular bodies. So their work at the university, rather than being the so-called flip side of Fit is a Feminist Issue, that project, is meant to be, I think, continuous with it, and of course, the reverse is true as well. As feminist philosophers, they're proposing a lived and embodied engagement with ideas and the world, suggesting that frames of thought that are meant to foster intelligent, transformative intellectual dispositions can also be mobilized somatically, walked, stretched, sweated, rested, and so on. Their work, I would suggest, helps us to think about humanizing the future by suggesting we ought not to only think about humanizing the future, we need to live about humanizing the future. So I just will give you a brief introduction of each one. Samantha Brennan is Dean of the College of Arts and Professor of Philosophy at the University of Guelph. Samantha's research is in ethical theory, applied ethics, and feminist philosophy. She's also a co-founder and co-editor of Feminist Philosophy Quarterly, an online open access journal. And as her lovely bio says, when she's not deaning, editing, blogging, and writing, Brennan also rides bikes and lifts things around the gym. And Tracy Isaacs is our Associate Dean Academic here in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Western and a Professor of Philosophy and Women's Studies and Feminist Research, as well as an occasional instructor of creative nonfiction in the writing program. Her research focuses on issues of responsibility in collective action contexts, collective obligation, ethics, and feminist ethics. She also works on feminist issues in sport and fitness, food, dieting, and body image. Tracy and Samantha, as you would know from that slide, are the co-authors of Fit at Midlife, a Feminist Fitness Journey, which was published by Greystone Books in 2018. So now as I turn the mic over to Samantha and Tracy, I also want to thank our 2 SASAH students to my right, Veronica Botnick and Denisa Logojan, who will be leading off our question period following the presentation. So please help me welcome Samantha and Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Whoops. Thanks. It's good to be here. I'm a big fan of SASAH, as well as sort of peripherally involved in SASAH.
Yeah, I used to guest lecture, actually, in SASAH. I would do a unit on themes in philosophy about the self.
So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about our Feminist Fitness project, which we've been working on for about just over 6 years now. And that's an outline of what we're going to do. So we're going to start off by telling you about the blog and the book and how it all began and why. And then we will turn it over to our main question, I guess, which is why is fitness a feminist issue? And we'll take up 4 different ways that we think fitness is a feminist issue. And then we'll answer an objection because we're philosophers, so we always do that. We'll talk about people who have challenged us, oh, if all you have to worry about is fitness, then feminism must be done, kind of thing. So we'll address that a little bit. And then, because everybody always asks us for fitness tips, we will say a little bit about how to get started if you haven't already. So
and I would have never thought when we started that people would ever ask me for fitness tips. I have to say, of all the things I get to talk about, that one still surprises me.
Right.
And now strangers ask me for fitness tips because they recognize me from the blog. And it's a weird thing also for an academic to have kind of odd kind of fame outside of your area of research expertise, because we write books that not very many people read, but the blog is followed by, we just hit 20,000 WordPress followers. It began with, as some things do, with a Facebook post. It began with me 6 years ago at 48, thinking, I'm going to be turning 50 soon. Oh, good God. What do I want to, what thing do I want to accomplish, or what do I want to do in my 50s? And I started to think about how I wanted to have, at the time I had kind of a negative view of aging, so you'll have to excuse, I was sort of thinking of it being downhill from 50. And I was kind of thinking if it was downhill from 50, I wanted to start from a higher point. So I wanted to get really fit and get ready for the downhill slide. I no longer hold the negative view about life past 50, not surprisingly. But I posted that I wanted to be the fittest I'd ever been without having turned 50. Tracy chimed in and said, me too. And because we're philosophers, it's probably the most commented thing I've ever posted on Facebook, because every single philosophy friend said, but what do you mean by fitness? And then we practically had a journal article of various definitions of fitness and accounts of fitness and counterexamples. And then Tracy and I decided to take it on. We thought the question of what measure we use is one of the topics, ongoing topics of conversation and of the blog. But we started with a Facebook post, and then Tracy said, why not start a blog?
Right. So we had been thinking about blogging for a while because both of us have an interest in sort of more public type of more accessible work, or making our work more accessible. And so we kind of had tossed around independently of each other different ideas for a blog. And then when we decided to set ourselves this challenge to be the fittest we'd ever been in our lives by the time we turned 50, I said, why don't we start a blog about that? Because that way we could document some of that process around thinking about what does it mean to be the fittest we've ever been in our lives by the time we turn 50, what kind of things might we do to undertake that project. And also, we've been colleagues since 1993. So we thought, we've been having a sort of several decades, 2 decades, conversation about fitness from a feminist perspective. So what does it mean to pursue fitness from a feminist perspective instead of from the perspective that you see out there all the time, which is basically from a weight loss and aesthetic perspective, always coupling fitness with dieting and deprivation and punishing routines that are meant to kind of whip your body into shape. So we wanted a different type of approach. So we started the blog. There's some pages from our blog. These are some early posts. One of the most popular posts at the beginning was Samantha's critique of BMI. And also a post that I wrote about, which is still one of the most popular. Well, these two are still in the running for the most read posts. Mine was about why fitness models aren't models of health. So we started the blog, and we started our pact, as one of the media articles written after the book came out said. And we didn't expect very many people to be that interested, frankly, in two women approaching 50 and their fitness journey. We just kind of thought friends and family might find it interesting. But in fact, it turned out that there was a hunger for this kind of critique of fitness culture, fitness representations of fitness, and a desire for a different kind of approach.
And I'd say lots of the early feminist critiques of fitness really sort of gave up on physical activity as joy. So they really were kind of giving up, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. They were giving up on the whole thing. But we were both people who in our lives had found various kinds of physical activity to be very important to who we were. So we wanted to know about kind of rescuing that from the kinds of criticisms that feminists had leveled at physical activity and at sports. I will say, if you're going to be the fittest in your life by the time you turn year, pick a number, it helps not to, neither of us were high school athletes, as you might have gathered. So we're both academics who had sort of chance of being the most fit we'd ever been in our lives by the time we turned 50, in virtue of not... It was
like a live possibility.
In virtue of not having pursued PhDs and academic careers rather than, say, sporting careers or athletic careers. So we had a chance at it. And blogging turned out to be a lot of fun. If you're an academic, writing is kind of a tortured process for lots of us. It's hard. We spend a lot of hours on it, and then it gets read by reviewers. There's jokes about reviewer 2. Things are out for years, and then finally they see print. The whole thing is kind of long and painful. And blogging is kind of like...
the opposite.
You hit publish and you're done. I love that. I still get a kind of thrill of hitting publish. And I still love being able to go back and fix things. If I find mistakes, spelling mistakes or grammar, I think, why isn't all publishing like this? And now I've kind of made more publishing like that by doing some online open access stuff. So, but the blog has grown. We have 20,000 WordPress followers now. We're a community of 10 regular bloggers. We've had more than 250 people, I think this is telling, more than 250 people guest post. That's a lot of people. A lot of people who regularly read the blog and who comment. And we're both always surprised. Tracy had someone cheer her on in a race who knew her from the blog. I've been on airplanes, had people recognize me. It's the blog has a draw, and I think it does say that people really were ready for another kind of conversation about fitness.
So after a while, I mean, with over 250 guests and 10 regular bloggers now, you can imagine that there's a lot of content on the blog. But at the beginning, it was just the two of us, and we had a couple of guests once in a while. But over time, within the first couple of years, we figured, hey, we've got a lot of material. Maybe we can flip this into a book. We thought it would be a really fast process. It wasn't fast, because it came out in 2018, and we actually turned 50 in 2014. So the challenge was way over by the time the book came out. But we had a lot of fun writing the book. We did use quite a bit of the material from the blog, but we also wrote quite a bit of new material that documented each of our respective challenges, the Fittest by 50 challenge, kind of what we decided to do for that challenge. And in the end, we each set like a big goal. So Samantha's goal was to ride in the Friends for Life bike rally from Toronto to Montreal, and mine was to complete at least one Olympic distance triathlon by the time I turned 50. And so we both achieved those goals. And then we wrote about that in a book, and we also had chapters in the book that took up various themes around feminist critiques of fitness and suggestions about how to take a different approach.
And any cyclists in the room will recognize this as a posed photo, because I'm not wearing cycling shoes.
Right. Okay.
No helmet either.
So that's a little background about how it is that these two philosophers came to be talking about fitness. we both still think of ourselves not really, like, of all the things 20 years ago at the early part of my career, if you had asked me, what will you be known for when you're in your 50s, I would not have said fitness. In fact, Western news called us fitness gurus. That made me laugh, still does. Okay. So why is fitness a feminist issue? So as philosophers, we like to make lists and give reasons, and we're going to just go into 4 different areas of feminist fitness that we find compelling reasons to think of fitness as more of a social justice issue than you otherwise might. So those areas are equality, inclusivity or inclusiveness, aesthetics and embodiment, and finally, an overused word, but it's still good, empowerment.
So I'm going to talk about equality first. And I talk about this when I'm talking about fitness and inequality. I often use the phrase, the play gap, because we all know there's a pay gap between men and women, but there's also a play gap. And you don't have to go very far on the StatsCan website it's there and obvious and easy to see that men move more than women, and men move more than women starting when we're boys and girls, starting when we're babies. Pretty much early on, male children move more than female children. So one gap occurs pretty much right away. A second gap occurs, no surprise, in kind of adolescence, when we encounter our bodies, and and girls have are subject to a certain kind of messaging about our bodies that make us not very comfortable in sporting environments. And then the third one is, of course, when we have families. If you do that with an opposite sex partner, you're likely to have a lot less time for physical activity. So those are the 3 places in life that it occurs. It widens, and it's really striking if you're interested in health research. By the time you get to later life, the gap in terms of time that men and women put in for physical activity is quite striking. And everybody thinks, oh, I know these 3 women who are just, that's all they do, and the men in my life are couch potatoes. We're talking big picture here. You may have an unrepresentative sample around you. You might have chosen those people for that reason. So big picture, the gap is there. And it has health implications, but we're going to talk about more than just health. It affects the kinds of pleasures that are available to you in your life, and then there are spillover effects as well. Why does it start in the first place? Part of the story is about something that researchers who research sort of health and physical activity talk about as the protection paradox with kids. We want our kids not to get in trouble outside these days. And so we police their movements a lot and drive them everywhere. And we're worried about them, so they're not allowed to do things outside. It shouldn't be a surprise when you think about gender that the protection paradox is gendered. That is, boys are allowed to fall and hurt themselves. We just kind of pick them up and dust them off. And lots of parents worry a lot about how female children are treated and worry about them getting hurt. And researchers can do this they just put kids, you don't have to do very much, it turns out, to do a test on how people behave around different gendered kids. You just put them in different colored onesies and let them loose, right? Because that's the only marker people are using. And people will always worry about, pick up and comfort and say, don't do that again to the one in pink, and dust off and say, go back out there and don't get eaten by the wolves to the ones in blue. We worry a lot less about boys than we do about girls. There's reasons maybe to worry about that too. The one that occurs later as young women mature and have bodies that are subject to scrutiny, that one I think we're familiar with too. Lots of women won't do various kinds of sports because of the uniforms or because of the kinds of clothing you wear. I'm a cyclist, and so lots of women always complain about having to wear bike shorts and what you look like in bike shorts. And I used to row, and same thing with rowing. The unitard they wear for rowing. That's anyway. Lots of reasons that women have for being less comfortable than men in physical activity and physical activity settings. So that's the play gap. They're easy. This material, you don't have to look for it. It's really easy to find, and it's really striking, the difference on how much boys and girls, men and women move, and how much time we have for physical activity. I sort of joke about, one of the researchers who wrote about it talked about how many children a Canadian man has to have before he gives up playing weekly hockey. Turns out a lot. And women give up sports really easily. It's one of the first things to go when you get busy trying to juggle career and kids. And I often tell the story of women on my soccer team who would sneak out and lie about where they were going when they were actually going to soccer. And I thought, you're not having an affair, you're playing soccer. But it doesn't matter. The next thing, so that's on the play gap and equality. Yeah, go to the next one, yeah. So the next thing, when you look, if you take out your phone or your computer and Google fitness, image search, what you'll see are a lot of white people. You'll see a lot of people roughly aged, 17 to 24. You'll see a lot of people who look really fit. You'll see nobody who's overweight. You'll see very few people who don't have white skin. You'll see very few people who are older, very few people who are disabled. And that's we have a kind of this horrible notion about who fitness is for that I think leaves lots of people out. So you might have had friends who think, well, I'm going to get in shape before I go to the gym. Like, I shouldn't go to the gym until I'm already I look like I belong at the gym. I don't look like I belong at the gym. So it's set up in a way that I think lots of people feel left out, and it's hard to get over that. As a not small person, I used to joke about when I would go to a new gym, I make sure I wear things that people that recognize that I have done physical. I'm not a newcomer. So I used to wear a CrossFit hoodie whenever I went to a new gym, or I would have a water bottle for my triathlon that I'd done. Like, I'd have something there to give the fitness instructor clues that I wasn't a newcomer. And so we have a kind of idealized version of fitness that incorporates all of the prejudices our society has, and that makes it very difficult for people to participate who don't already fit that norm. Whether you don't fit that norm because when you have men's and women's change rooms, you choose other, because you don't identify as either gender, or if you're don't already look like you're a fit person, or if you're older, it's hard to walk in that door, it's hard to do that thing and say, this is something I want to take up. And I think that's especially hard for people with disabilities. One of our regular bloggers, the other Samantha who blogs for us, one of her favorite things to do is get hold of fitness places in Toronto and say, I'm in a wheelchair and I'd like to use your facility, and see how they respond and how they cope. And she's found some wonderful places and some horrible places and kind of blogged about her experiences a bit for us.
So it really meant a lot to us to present a more inclusive view of fitness, and that's what Samantha was talking about, partly because we are coming into an age that's not so frequently represented as well. But the other thing was, and this one really weighed heavy in our minds, was the issue of aesthetics and embodiment. I don't know about you, but in my experience, fitness was always associated with achieving a certain aesthetic. And when I was much younger, like sort of in the late 80s, early 90s, it was simply thinness. And then as I got older, as we came into the 90s and the early 2000s, it became even more demanding, which was leanness. So thinness with a kind of fit, toned body that was a lot more work. And so we wanted to spend a lot of time, and that's why, we talked about things like BMI, and we talked about different measures of fitness. That conversation that we had at the beginning of our, when we were first thinking about the blog, that conversation about what does count as fitness. introduced the possibility, imagine, that there are lots of different measures. So there's VO2 max, your cardio capacity. There's strength as a measure of fitness. There is, what else is there? There's a whole bunch.
Oh, balance.
Balance, right. Balance, flexibility. And there's also mental well-being. It's not all about physical. And so there are lots of things that you can think of as measures for fitness that don't only have to do with achieving a certain aesthetic. So why is that important? Well, first of all, let's back up. Why do we focus on the aesthetic so much, especially as women? And maybe not only as women. I think there's quite a demanding. I remember as a kid, actually, in the comic books, they had the Charles Atlas, program, and there was this thin guy, skinny guy on the beach who got sand kicked in his face, and then he went off and ordered the Charles Atlas workout series, and he came back and he was all strong, and he showed them kind of thing. But women especially have always associated or always felt this pressure to look a certain way, and the feminine aesthetic is very difficult to maintain and achieve. And so when we make it about looks, it's kind of, this is very oversimplifying, but I think it still holds true. It's a kind of acquiescence to normative femininity and the expectations of what a woman is supposed to look like. And if we don't conform in that way, it has all kinds of residual impact on other areas of our lives. So that's why. But why is that maybe not the best thing? So why don't we want to be motivated by that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One reason is, just back to the beginning, fitness is not the same as thinness, and how you look is really not a good measure of whether you're achieving improvements in your overall physical fitness and well-being. So that's one reason. Another reason is that making it all about that tends to make dieting a focus. And this was a really popular message, or a really unpopular message that we propagate all the time on the blog. Diets don't really work. They just don't. So it is the statistics about successful dieting where people lose weight and keep it off are extremely depressing if you're trying to lose weight and keep it off. Because the statistics show that about 90% of the people who lose weight and try to maintain it gain it back. And that's why programs like Weight Watchers have special deals for returning members all the time. Like every January, there's a new deal for returning members, because there are lots of returning members, which is an odd thing if you think about it. It just doesn't seem like it's that successful of a program if you keep having to sign up every year. Right? So there are lots better things we can do for our health than get on that yo-yo dieting track. There's all kinds of research to show, for example, that kind of yo-yo dieting actually puts stress on the body. It changes our metabolism. It's not healthy. It also means that if my only objective in embarking on a fitness program is to lose weight and to look a certain way, then if I don't achieve that, then there's no motivation left. There's no reason for me to keep up the program. But there are lots of other benefits to embarking on this kind of program. So we wouldn't want people to be so fixated on achieving a certain very difficult aesthetic that, you know, is really hard for many people to achieve, and certainly even harder for many people to maintain. It's actually quite a harmful, single-minded focus, because most of the time it's not going to work. But if you keep at it, you will experience improvements in physical health and fitness. This fixation on looking a certain way, Samantha started talking about how just the clothing expectations for some of the activities like cycling and rowing are a barrier for some people. We kind of feel like, hey, I'm not really comfortable being in something that's so revealing of my body shape, because there is so much stigma around not having a perfect body. And so the more we're in these environments, you know, where we feel like, in order to belong, I have to already look as if I'm physically fit. And there is that association that people make of fitness with having a certain type of body. So there was a very interesting and sad study that came out while we were in the early days of the blog. It was around 2013. Came out of the UK. And the finding was that there were women who were putting treadmills in sheds and working out in sheds so that they wouldn't be seen, because they were so ashamed of their bodies. And so this tendency to body shaming is prevalent, not just kind of out there, but a lot of women have internalized it. And, you know, that's just one example. I think, you know, for a while, almost every day we were just hearing people were sending us depressing things.
I think one of the ones with women running at night, again, not to be seen. So it doesn't matter that it's less safe. It doesn't matter that it's dark and scary and you might slip on ice. It doesn't matter that bad things might happen to you. But what matters the most is no one seeing you running when you're fat. That matters more than anything. That's way worse. Right, so that was another one of the ones that was.
Yeah, so, you know, it was really important to us to separate fitness from these aesthetic ideals, and to have a much more body positive message. And so if you read our blog, you'll see that it's very anti-dieting. We almost never talk about dieting. We almost never talk about weight loss unless it's for performance reasons, and even then there's always all kinds of qualifying clauses, and some of us object to that, but we've got a diversity of authors now, so. But generally speaking, it's just not, yeah, we're pretty body positive on the blog. So the other respect in which we feel fitness is a feminist issue is about this idea of empowerment. A lot of research, well, one of the things that makes the gender pay gap so egregious is that participation in sport actually improves people's confidence. Not just in sport, but in life more generally. And so if there's a gap in participation in sport that starts at an early age, where girls aren't participating in quite the same numbers as boys, and that gap really starts to emerge in a big way around adolescence, then that gap, that confidence factor, is going to be lacking. And so if confidence tracks success, which it does. You know, I remember when I went to give when I came here actually to give a job talk in 1992. My thesis instructor had 2 pieces of advice. The first piece of advice was, she said, wear dark pantyhose. I don't know where that one came from, but I did. I wore dark pantyhose. And the second piece of advice was, act confident. Even if you're really nervous, act confident. She said that'll take you far. If you just act like you know what you're talking about. And so I did. Like, I really practiced acting like I knew what I was talking about. Not that I didn't know what I was talking about, but, you know, that conscious effort to act confident really helped. So now confidence, I got the job. So confidence tracks success. In blogging about our Fittest by 50 challenge, and especially when we turned 50 and we started reflecting on some of the changes that had taken place, you know, during the time that we were doing this challenge, because I started this challenge not as a very fit person. I mean, all that was left in my fitness routine was walking and yoga. Those were the things I did. And there's nothing wrong with walking and yoga, but I wasn't exerting myself at all. Like, I was just feeling that, you know, here I am, I'm approaching 50, and my groceries are starting to feel heavy, and I'm starting to just feel a little bit kind of unenergetic, and like I need to amp things up a little bit. And so my Fittest by 50 challenge took me into some really challenging physically demanding activities around triathlon training. So Samantha got me to sign up for a triathlon. Never having done triathlon ever, I didn't ride bike, I hadn't been swimming, and I hated running. And it's like swim, bike, run. Those are the three things. So I kind of had to start training in these things. And, you know, we do recommend that you choose things that you enjoy. And I did come to enjoy most areas of triathlon. But at the end, so after I did I did 2 Olympic distance triathlons by the time I turned 50. And I felt awesome. Like, I really felt good. And one of the things that made me feel good was this sense of really owning these physical activities myself. You know, that nobody else in my life would care if I never trained again. Like whatever. So they were things that I did for me. And I really experienced this sense of what I have come to call confident ownership of my physicality. Like, it's mine, it belongs to me. And it's really extended into all areas of my life, all physical areas of my life, where I just feel like really a sense of agency around my body that I never did before. It was quite a shift. So a lot of women who are athletes express something like that in terms of their relationship to their body. They're much less obsessed with, or less obsessed, maybe not even at all, with what they look like, and much more interested in what their body can do and the sense of agency in general that comes from having that strong connection with your physicality.
I went to the martial arts thing, which is
yes.
So one of the things I was doing during the course of the challenge in the book was a martial art called Aikido. And people often think about martial arts and self-defense in terms of fighting off attackers. They imagine that what you're going to do is be attacked in a dark alley, and you're going to be able to fight people off. And people say, you're not going to be able to fight anybody off. What's this? There's no self-defense reason. And I actually don't think that's the right story about martial arts and self-defense. I think the right story about martial arts and self-defense is this sense of owning your body. It's this sense of reacting pretty automatically. Like, it's not something you have to think about if someone touches you in a way you don't like. It's a pretty automatic reaction. You spend enough time kind of on the mats with other people in consensual violence, mutually, you're fighting in a way that you've agreed to the terms. And you have a response that's there, kind of in the bank when you need it. But if someone touches me in a bar now, if someone puts a hand on me in a way I don't like, they can tell pretty quickly that I don't like that, and they should stop. And it's more about it not happening in the first place, I think, than me being able to fight them off in an alley with knives or something. That's not really what I think the self-defense piece is about. It's really about body confidence.
Yeah. Okay. So how important is this all in the scheme of things?
So we get one of the responses we get, so we're philosophers, and philosophers always deal with objections. And one of the common objections we get when we're talking about feminism and fitness is, surely this shows that feminism's work is done, because if what you're talking about is injustice in the area of physical fitness, you don't have, this is like first world feminism at its best. You don't really have anything to worry about if what you're worried about really is women getting less time at the gym than men. That's pretty petty. And so I write as a philosopher on small inequalities and why they matter. And sometimes I think they matter because small inequalities add up to bigger inequalities. And other times I think they matter because they're actually connected to some bigger issues. And this is one where I think it's connected to bigger issues. So I don't think the lack of representation of women in politics is unconnected to the fact that boys and girls have different amounts of time in physical activity. Those things are connected. Right? These issues are not, it doesn't kind of stand on its own. I think there's a causal connection in all sorts of areas between women and physical activity and the kinds of lives women lead.
Absolutely. And when we think of things like the second shift or the division of domestic labor at home and things like this, these are huge issues that still are present today, and that I say still are present today because I would have thought, 25, 30 years ago that by now we would be seeing some progress on these measures. But, there's still that whole issue of how many children does a man have to have in Canada before he gives up his weekly hockey is a current question that shows, in a way, it's an illustration of the gap and the amount of time women spend on domestic labor. So we think of it as a social justice issue. Now, do we think it's the most important thing? No. I mean, we both work on other things as well. Violence against women is really important. Gendered war crimes are really important. There are all kinds of things that are really important. But as feminists, we have a commitment to social justice. We have a commitment to a more inclusive life and a more inclusive world. And so we care about these things. And we're going to keep working on them.
So here's our advice bit, because we often get asked about advice about physical fitness. Again, we're amused by this. I went to a convocation at Guelph recently and had two women kind of running behind me going, "Sam, Sam," and I was, "What?" And I turned around, so I'm in full academic regalia, and I turn around, and they say, we're here for our kids' graduation, but we just wanted to let you know that we really like the blog, and we've started a power walking club, and what do you think our next step should be? So I hadn't expected this, right? So a friend posted something this morning that on the pick something you can enjoy theme, and then we'll get back to the small theme, which is, she posted, she's a personal trainer, and she posted the question about asking people to think back to when they enjoyed physical activity, when they thought it was something fun they were doing. And she said pretty much everybody answered they were doing it in a social group, they were doing it as part of a team, and it was something some activity or thing they loved. And then she said, "Well, what are you doing now?" And they all said, "Well, I'm putting earphones in and going to the gym and doing things I hate." And there's no surprise here why you don't like that. Think back to what you did that you liked and find a way to capture that again. Yeah. So it's find something you love.
There I am with 4 friends and we're about to run a half marathon. Look at how happy we look.
You look very happy.
Awesome. So, and some of those people had never done it before. And it was like, we got really good at sort of arm twisting people into doing things that they've never tried.
Like triathlon.
Yeah, like triathlon.
So you always talk about the start small. We both talk about the pick something, don't set outrageous goals for yourself, like that you've never been, but pick something, start small.
It was a little triathlon.
We started with a small triathlon. So start small. find a community, find friends, and don't focus on weight and focus on other kinds of goals and performance goals. Those are kind of our go-to pieces of advice that we have.
Yeah, and today I blogged about my winning formula, which is consistency and forgiveness. Try to be consistent, and then when you're not, forgive yourself and move on.
Right, you haven't quit.
No, haven't quit. So I think that's pretty much it. We are, contactable in various ways.
If you want to ever guest post for us, give us a line, drop us a line. We have lots of guests, and it'd be fun to have people. If you thought about something during our lecture and want to go away and write a blog post about it, we'd love to have you guest blog. That would be super fun.
Yeah, we have all kinds of diverse content. You don't have to be over 50 to blog for us.
Yeah, most people are not over 50.
Yeah, most people aren't. We're the older grandmothers. And that's about it. Thank you.
So can I borrow this and they can give it back to you? So now I'm going to ask Veronica and Denisa if they will ask their questions. And I don't know if you want to give the microphone back to Tracy, or do you want to yell?
Well, they can ask the question and...
Yeah, I think so, because actually I think it's better if Greg has this mic. So if you would give it back. Or I can do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my first question, my question would be, how would you translate this to a younger audience, in the sense that there are huge expectations for women to be lean or fit at like a younger age, and how would you translate this body positivity to younger women?
Thank you. That's a great question.
It's a hard question.
It's a hard question, and we actually think this is an all ages issue. That, as I said, I would have hoped would have been resolved by now, but it's not. So how would we translate this? Well, we really have not really different advice for younger women as we do for women in our age demographic, which is to do your best to change from an aesthetic goal-oriented approach to a performance goal-oriented approach.
And do something that you enjoy for its own sake, so that if you set up these goals and don't meet them, you actually love the thing that you do. One of the interesting studies that came out recently was on people who exercise for reasons of body dissatisfaction. Exercise makes them feel worse about their bodies. So that's not a good motivation going in, and it's likely to be self-defeating. It's not going to work. Right. So if that's your motivation, it's not a good place. It's not a good place to start. Right. Think about something else, and find something you enjoy for its own sake. It's easy to say that. I know we live in a world which just makes it just about impossible. I see the young women I work out in the dean working out in the university gym, which is always where I've worked out, and I'm just surrounded by young women who many of them are really, I can see they're really struggling. I have a friend who's a personal trainer there who talked about her last 3 personal training clients crying about the way they looked. And she says, look, I'm not a counselor. I'm a former women's football player. I've been athletic my whole life. The gym is where I feel comfortable. I don't know what to say to them. And we were chatting about things you might say to them, because it's really hard.
And it also, we do our best too, not to give condescending kind of, once you get older. But the thing is, it takes time, because we're battling against cultural and social messaging that is all over the place. And so one of the things that I think both of us have successfully done that's helped so much is we've inserted ourselves into body positive communities that we are bombarded because of that with reprogramming type of messaging. And I will not talk to friends about, not all my friends are in the feminist fitness community, but I won't talk to friends about weight loss. I won't endorse any kind of conversation about dieting or fad dieting especially or anything like that. I just won't, because I love my friends the way they are. I don't notice when they've gained 10 pounds or lost 10. I actually do not notice, because that is not the measure by which I value the people in my life. And so I think, as with all feminist goals, there's the personal, like how do you recalibrate within yourself? And then there's the more political, social change motivation, which is to try to shift everybody's orientation on these things. But yeah, it's a good question.
There are gyms that are better than others. I mean, in Toronto, I was a member of News Girls, which is a feminist boxing gym. And there's no, there's a very trans and gender queer friendly space. It's very body positive. There's more and more places, I think, that have an alternative message, but they can be, it can be hard to find. And we didn't grow up in Instagram culture. I look at my kids with, the cult of Instagram and think, ooh, I'm really glad. There are no photos. There are very few photos of my teenage years out there, and I'm mostly very glad about this. So it's a different to that respect. The presentation of a body, I didn't have that growing up, and I think I'm happy I didn't have that growing up. Yeah.
And resist. I know a good friend of mine has just joined one of these boot camp type of things that they have at gyms at the beginning of the year. And she said, I will not let them weigh me. I will not let them subject me to weekly weigh-ins as a measure of my progress. I had to fire a personal trainer because he just wouldn't let go of that as a measure of my progress. Like, what about keeping track of whether I'm adding weight to the bench press? Can't you just use that? Like, that's kind of why I'm here, is to get stronger. It's like, yeah, but we have to track your weight. Oh, it was like impossible to talk him into something different. So I think we also need to resist.
Next question.
Okay.
Veronica?
My question is, how do we, as the social media influencer generation, use this technology to our advantage and redefine or reinvent the gender binary and roles in society?
I think there are some good influences out there. There's on Instagram, there's a body positivity, and there's the people who did the T-shirt, the people who made my T-shirt.
The feminist T-shirt. Such a good T-shirt.
They I can't remember their name. Anyway, they have so there are communities in kind of online spaces that do represent other images of fitness, and I think if you sort of deliberately seek them out and try to spread the word, I think that's a good thing. I think having, we were shocked when Self magazine, so we were interviewed by Self magazine, and we both had didn't know what to expect from Self magazine, because we had an idea of Self magazine from some years ago. And Self, like Teen Vogue, has kind of undergone a bit of a change of heart.
Like a politically subversive kind of
change.
Self
now has some really good larger women of color, women of different abilities, imagery when it comes to their fitness posts, which has been really nice. So I think joining those communities and using them and sharing alternative images of fitness, I think that's an important thing for us to be doing.
Yeah, and we've, we're in the time of selfies now, and we've blogged, each of us has blogged about how we can use self-representation to challenge expectations and just put that out there in social media. We're older, so just as older athletes, that challenge is what people come to expect. And so there are all kinds of different ways that the social media generations can not buy in, kind of back to the resistance, to the traditional kind of representations that we associate with fitness, and instead broaden to promote a more inclusive, more diverse set of images and messages.
So we'll play with the microphone. So are there other questions that you would like to pose for Tracy and Samantha? I will maybe ask one. I was thinking when you were describing not having necessarily been really sort of active in fitness at earlier stages of your lives, you know, you're ambitious to become academics, among other things. And so I wonder about the sort of patterns that, you know, you see yourselves having experienced at earlier stages around competition, you know, sort of proving oneself, getting ahead, all that sort of thing. It seems like you, at this stage, were willing to sort of, or open and wanted to kind of displace some of that with other ways of operating. It strikes me that, you know, we live in a world where it would be great for all of us, including those of us who want to succeed in academia, to also have some other ways of thinking about the sort of value system that we're operating according to. So this is a very vague and open question, but I wonder if you could reimagine your earlier life. Would there be things that you might have done differently that would have been better for your fitness and potentially better for the other aspects of yourself?
I can imagine a different world. So when I would have loved, so I martial arts and I played soccer, and I found my son started to play rugby, and I found myself thinking, I would have loved to have played rugby. Girls playing rugby wasn't an option when I was growing up. Field hockey was maybe the closest you could get, but they were very limited in terms of what girls could do in terms of sports. So I sometimes imagine a different world and what it would have been like to grow up in that world. And I think about what because I describe myself as being kind of a bookworm, an academic. I was smart, I was headed to university, and that's what I focused on. But there were these inklings, because now I think back, and I think there were these inklings that I would have done something else. Like I showed up one day for a run club. And I don't know why I showed up for run club, but I thought it wasn't weight loss. I just thought running seemed like a good thing to do. It was like it could be fun. I showed up at a run club. And the way run club at my high school worked, everyone put on their running shoes, and then they dashed, and they were gone. And I ran a few hundred meters and felt like I was going to die, and I stopped. And no one ever came back or asked why I didn't come back to run club. And I just thought running was either something you could do or you couldn't do. And clearly I couldn't. I mean, it was like jumping into a pool and, I didn't have any idea that you had to work at this to get better at it, that most of them started out not being able to run very far or very fast. I thought, well, clearly I'm not a runner. And that was the last time I went back to run club. So it's not that there was no, and I did look at sports and wonder about which one I would play if I played sports, but they were not a very satisfying list of sports. And you were either a jock or you were smart, and there was no way to be both back, in my high school. There is a way to do that now. I have kids now who things are kinder that way. But no, so I think often about how the world could be different and what I would be like if I'd had that from the get-go. And then I ask, what could this world be like now? How could this world be different now? So that when people later are saying how they didn't get to participate. We have so many people who, whenever we post anything about gym class turning people off physical activity for life, we just have hundreds of comments. It's instantly hundreds of comments. There are people talking about their horrible childhood fitness experiences, even now. So I think one of the big things we could do is make gym class fun for everybody, not just for athletes. Yeah.
And I also took your question to be a little bit about the value of competition and our measures of success. And I think one thing that I would do differently, if I could go back and say to the younger me some words of wisdom, maybe, it would be something along the lines of, you don't have to excel at everything that you do.
Everything you can love. You can love a thing without excelling at it.
You can keep doing something that you just like doing, but you're not necessarily really good at, which wasn't an option that I ever seriously considered before. I honestly would not have been able to do triathlon when I was younger, because I would have thought that I had to be one of the ones who was in the top, you know, at least in the top 10 or something. And there was no way. I mean, seriously, today, if I make it out of the bottom half, I am so happy. I've often finished way in the bottom of the bottom half and still had a good experience. So it would be that idea of competition, measures of success that don't have to include, you know, that you only do the things you're good at. And also this distinction that we make between the bookish kids and the physically active kids. So I was a bookish kid. I mean, I did swim and stuff like that, but I just wasn't an athlete. And so I never really thought of myself as someone for whom physical activity was an integral part of my life until I got into, you know, grad school, and then then it was just this single-minded focus on reaching a certain weight and looking a certain way and maintaining that weight. I mean, to the point of, you know, going through an eating disorder and all the things that can happen when that becomes the focus. And that also ties into this I think it's related to that idea of perfectionism and success, and we have to, you know, be not just okay, but at the ideal of everything that we do. And it took me a lot of years of undoing that, and this blog kind of turbocharged my exit out of all that mindset in a way that I have found extremely liberating.
I have one more question. This is sort of, again, long-winded and somewhat speculative. My wife, who teaches in high school, has done courses about how the school system is failing boys, not teaching boys particularly well. And so you can imagine that a lot of those boys who are not only not coming to university, but they're also not out there running races and that sort of thing. And so I'll put that aside and say I'm also involved in a project called Speculative Energy Futures, and there's a part of it that's called Feminist Energy Futures. So we're looking at the history of the way we have used energy in the West in particular, and how we could rethink the value system around that through a feminist lens in order to actually handle our energy future more successfully. So I guess maybe it's not exactly I'm challenging you, but I guess I'm wondering, are there things about the feminist project that you're undertaking that you think have the potential to be mainstreamed? I mean, I guess, you know, one of them, certainly what you said about doing things you like. But I wonder, you know, if you've thought a little bit about, not that I think this needs to be your mission, but if you've thought about the way that this kind of project, this kind of thinking actually has applications, well, can go further in that regard.
I do. I think one of the things that we haven't really talked much about today, but that is an issue that we take seriously, is the idea of accessibility to, I don't know if this picks up on what you're talking about, but so it's mainstream in the sense that the inclusive feminist project or the inclusive fitness project is not only about gender and body image and that kind of thing, although that is a huge part of it, but it's also about how to make fitness activity something that is accessible to a larger spectrum or a larger demographic, you know, not just age, but also income. And, you know, a lot of these activities cost a lot of money, and a lot of it takes place in gyms or is part of a community that, you know, like with cycling and so forth, but it's expensive. It can be expensive. And so we do think of access as an issue. So that's what I would say to that in terms of the more mainstream impact that we hope we're promoting. And also, it's not just women who have these distorted views of what it means to be fit. I think everybody, in a way, just associates it with like losing weight and maintaining a certain weight, and this obsession with, you know, we see all these weird diets like low carb, paleo this and keto that, and I mean, it's unbelievable how mediated everybody's relationship to food and eating is. There's nothing.
Right, and that's not just women. I think about so many.
Yeah.
I think about all the male actors these days who have to have their body in shape for a project they're doing, and how that's like a full-time job to get in shape for a movie they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what does an unmediated relationship with food even look like? I think for a lot of people it's just not even a real possibility, which is sad, you know. So
in terms of energy, I always think about cycling, and I always think about, I'm now on a campus that's much more bike friendly than Western is, and so it's been interesting for me to see that. So I'm not that weird being the year-round cyclist dean. So I ride, you know, I'm in the winter on my bicycle, and I've got lots of abundant covered bike parking, abundant secure bike parking, and you can ride bikes on campus. So there's none of this. I'm a rule follower, so I hate signs that say you must walk your bike, because I'm an ethicist, so it makes me want to get off my bike and walk it. And Western has all of the must walk your bike signs, which I think, yes, and they're awful because then it takes you forever to get anywhere, because you are walking. You've got a bicycle, but you're walking it, and so yeah, through here that's all. But to walk your bike, right? Guelph does not. Yeah.
Any other questions?
In response to something you said, Tracy, and thinking a little bit about Ronnie's comment, one of our advisory council people, Owen Charters, who's in charge of the Boys and Girls Club, he was quoting to me a statistic about the amount of time young girls spend basically kind of working on themselves in order to present themselves on social media. And of course, the bad news is the numbers are going up for boys too. So in terms of now what we're presenting ourselves for, and fundamentally it is for the camera, you could say. So, I mean, we all know that has actually even skewed further the kind of way we think about what a good-looking body it looks like. And so certainly I think this does go back to your point about social media, not only as a zone of possibility, but also quite a fraught environment as well when it comes to all this.
Yeah, for sure. Other questions?
Yeah, I think we're supposed to use this.
Well, I can hear you.
So I was interested that you have brought up food a couple of times. And I just wanted to ask if food comes more, though, I totally agree with you that you can't be doing these ridiculous diets, and I don't understand keto at all. Like, it's all fat. What is that? I don't get that at all. But certainly food can help with fitness, right? Sure. But then we're also back to, I think this certainly connects up to accessibility, because, you know, I can eat certain things that you know, I think or hope will keep me healthy and this and that, but a lot of people won't have access to, whether it's for costs or just being able to get to a location where I can get that, and whether I can get my grass-fed beef or not. Obviously, that's a total privilege. So the question really is, does food come into your blogging in any way, or do you try to avoid food entirely? Because it is, I mean, we know that certain things are going to make you really not fit, and other things are going to help you be more fit, right?
Yeah, one of our regular bloggers, Catherine Womack, writes about health policy, obesity, and does a lot of work on sort of food policy in the US. So that would be kind of a natural, some of these things are just not natural fits for us, but other people on the blog write about them.
But we never write about it in a prescriptive way, like you should eat this and you shouldn't eat that. In fact, we blog about, I have a post about why food is beyond good and evil and how we shouldn't moralize food, for example. Prompted by a comment from David about orange juice being evil.
But it has been, I was happy to, we have a different, I was happy to see it's been dropped from the Canada Food Guide. the new version of family
right,
food.
it's true. And probably I will write a blog post about the new Canada Food Guide. So we do talk about food, but we don't promote anything about food.
Sure. Right. No. Right. So Tracy's written about
Luna bars.
as smaller,
Marketed
more
to women.
expensive. Right. Yeah.
What is that? But yeah, so there, we've written about chocolate. We've written about food and various times along the way.
And thought more about food as fuel for performance rather than as how many calories does this have and how will I weigh at the end. More like, how does this make me feel when I'm riding my bike and what makes me go faster.
And we both have different approaches to food.
Yeah.
So Sam's more of a sports nutrition type and I'm more of an intuitive eating type.
I've been fascinated recently by the studies that showed that because we were new, actually I got fascinated about it again because Guelph is doing a study on this so swishing and spitting sports drink improves your performance. So you don't swallow any, and it improves your performance. And at first everybody thought, well, that's just an example of placebo effect because you think you're getting sports drink. They put cyclists out there and then gave half of them, it all tasted like sports drink, but only half of them actually got stuff that was sports drink, and they were instructed to swish and spit it out. And the people who had the actual carbohydrate containing drink and swished and spit had the performance boosting effect, but not the others. So it's not just placebo effect, whatever it is. So it's probably a signal that our mouth sends to our brain about what's coming, but it's smarter than we thought it was. And so that kind of stuff kind of fascinates me from, how much of, I'm fascinated in some of the details of how these things affect our bodies and how they affect sports performance. Anyway, I wanted to take part in the study so badly because it asked for cyclists of various ages and stages, and then it maxed out at 45. I thought, damn, because it involved like I could do free
the fitness
VO2,
of a 45-year-old.
free VO2 max testing and a whole bunch of other fun, awful stuff, and I thought that would be a good thing to do, but no, 45, so no.
We like free testing.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more?
So I'll just premise this. I'm a genetics student. I'm also in SASAH. So I bring a scientific perspective lens to this whole thing. And I'm just wondering if you have any collaborators in like biochem or something that's working on your blog to sort of give that perspective. Because I've heard in some of my classes, like, in biochem 2280 second year, they sort of mention the keto diet and how ridiculous it is to not consume carbohydrates. Like, you need carbohydrates, like, physiologically to function. So I was just wondering if you had any, like, contributors from that perspective to sort of broaden the audience maybe and sort of open the conversation a little bit more from more of a scientific perspective to be like, this is why these diets are bad, more so than just like, the fat and things like that. So, yeah.
You want a guest post for us? You should. It would be lovely. But really, we're all, I think pretty much, there's a few scientists.
Yes, but they don't blog about the scientific stuff. Like Catherine, so the closest we have is Catherine, who blogs about, she takes apart research reports and investigates that way. But we don't have scientists, so if you'd like to, we'd love that. We just quote scientists. Like the scientists say, researchers say the keto diet is ridiculous. It's good enough for us. And then Catherine gives the more fulsome critique. Yes.
Yeah. You were mentioning some of the eating disorders that are affecting women, and often once you have an eating disorder, it kind of sticks with you for the rest of your life. But they start when girls are young, and sometimes for boys too. So what do you kind of suggest is the best way to reach these younger children who are kind of getting so much from media and like their parents often, like what's the best way to reach them at an early age?
Through their parents?
Yeah, through their parents. I mean, I think sometimes I'm dealing with friends who want to put their children on restrictive diets because they're worried about their weight. I don't know why they think this is a good thing to talk to me about, because it's not really, but people will approach me and ask me about this. And I will often use arguments that I don't think are the best arguments. but they're more, so I often use the argument for them that it's more likely to, that you're more likely to have an overweight child if you put that child on a diet. If you start policing and patrolling your child's eating behavior and making such a hyper focus on everything the child eats and you're weighing and measuring and put Fitbits on them, the end result of that is not going to be a happy, thin child, right? The more
Well, if that's what you're after,
that's what you're after.
This is not the right approach.
If that's what you're after, that's not the right approach, right? So I often show people the research that says these things are more likely to be self-defeating by your own measures. I don't think that's the best argument, because I think it's actually, even if it worked, there might be reasons not to do it. But I'll go for the consequentialist argument that says, look, it doesn't work, so you shouldn't.
But it is an answer that sort of buys into fat stigma.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, that would be a terrible outcome. Right. So, but yeah, if that's what they're after, that's not what is likely to happen.
Okay.
I think we are done. So it's a huge pleasure to thank Tracy and Samantha for a really inspiring and very engaging and energetic talk that made me, who's not completely uninvolved in fitness, actually ask a lot of questions of myself about, sort of my attitudes and ideas. And so certainly I think besides the narrative and the great advice, there's also a whole sort of values piece that I think you bring to this that is really, really enlightening and really helpful to be part of. So thank you very much.